so will be the fate of every treacherous snake son in your honorless chapter!
Do not speak to me of honor. You are as guilty as we are. This is the Imperium of man, old wolf, not a fabled empire of bliss and joy. We are the Emperor's gift. We know what must be done.
Welcome to Fightmaster, the show where we analyze the galaxy's greatest warriors and break down their most iconic duels. My name is Precognition, and today we have some brutal Imperial versus Imperial action. A clash between one of the most famous warriors in galactic history, and a warrior whose actions are deliberately covered up. Space Marine heroes with vastly different styles and ideologies, coming to blows at the end of a bitter Cold War. From the Grey Knights, and representing the Emperor's Holy Inquisition, the Blade Breaker, Hyperion. From the Space Wolves comes the High King of Fenris himself, the Chapter Master, Logan Grimnar, the Great Wolf. As fights go, this one seems like a complete mismatch on the surface. Logan is one of the most accomplished Space Marines of all time, and he's against Hyperion, who had yet to even see five years of active service. However, there are a number of factors that made this match a much closer contest than it had any right to be, and thus, more interesting to talk about. Firstly, Hyperion isn't a normal member of the Adeptus Astartes. He is a Grey Knight. This means he's a psyker right off the bat. It also means he has access to unusual equipment not available to your average chapter of Space Marines. Most notably, the Grey Knight Aegis pattern power armor. While this is standard issue for most Grey Knights, as each psyker is different, and every Grey Knight is a psyker, their suits of power armor are customized to make best use of each Knight's abilities. In the case of Hyperion, this means his standard power pack has been replaced with a miniature warp drive, which allows the Grey Knight to teleport short distances by feeding psychic energy into the drive. Aegis power armor also comes with a wrist-mounted Stormbolter as standard, something most Space Marines don't have access to without Terminator armor or a vehicle. Hyperion is also armed with a Nemesis Force Staff, and while we don't tend to think of staves as the weapon of iconic warriors, a Force Staff is one of the most potent weapons a person can be armed with. In ancient times, the stave was a very powerful weapon indeed, able to defend and attack at the same time, able to generate enormous amounts of leverage and therefore crushing power, all while having a large and adjustable range. Against the armor of the 41st millennium, of course, a large stick has lost some of its dominance, but as a force weapon, the staff Hyperion bears is so much more. Featuring a generator akin to that of a power weapon, a force weapon emits a field that peels apart metal, while also acting as a focus for the psyker to channel their mental might through, meaning the weapon grows in deadliness according to the power of the psyker wielding it. One final note before we move on from Hyperion's staff. It is perhaps the perfect choice of weapon in a duel against a foe with a two-headed axe. Its reach, leverage, and versatility vastly reducing the effectiveness of such a weapon. In terms of fighting style, Hyperion is aggressive and mobile, overwhelming most foes with a relentless flurry of twirling staff strikes, keeping them in range with his speed and the reach of his weapon until the enemy falls. Do not mistake his speed and mobility for elusiveness, however. While extremely talented, the Blade Breaker seems to struggle when an enemy forces him to fight while moving backwards. As such, he tends to simply surrender the range advantage of his staff and fight in the pocket when pressed, rather than be forced onto the back foot, relying on his speed and psychic abilities to keep him safe until he can find a way to retake the initiative and force an enemy back. Logan Grimnar is also an aggressive fighter, though where Hyperion is a whirling swarm of attacks, the Great Wolf is more like a battering ram. Clad in a unique set of ancient Terminator armor, the Great Wolf is almost impervious to standard weaponry. His armor is capable of self-repair, and seems far less lumbering than your average suit of tactical dreadnought armor, a fact Logan is famous for taking advantage of, as despite the massive bulk of his suit, the Space Wolf Chapter Master can not only maneuver deftly, but sprint. In terms of weaponry, the Great Wolf wields a Stormbolter built into his armor, along with the massive and sort of stupid Axe Morkai, a double-headed master-crafted power axe, which definitely isn't corrupted by Khorne. While this combination of weapons lacks versatility, and the head is likely too big to act as an effective hooking mechanism, negating one of the major advantages the axe has as a weapon, it still remains a devastating piece of weaponry, cleaving through armor and flesh with ease, the sheer force of its blows at least somewhat making up for its unwieldiness. In combat, Grimnar charges forward with what seems like reckless abandon, hoping to take advantage of his superior bulk and armor by making any encounter dirty and brutal. Do not mistake this for a lack of skill. Logan is simply aware of the advantages he possesses, and seeks to draw opponents into a brawl, when it actually takes the greatest of skill and composure to find a way through his monstrously thick armor. The Great Wolf fights like this even in the midst of large-scale battles, relying on the fluid teamwork of his pack to cover any openings he leaves, while also expecting them to take advantage of the disorder his headlong charge tends to create in foes. This clash of heroes, taking place aboard the flagship Coral's Hope, at the end of an Imperial Cold War between two loyalist factions, the Ordo Malleus Inquisition and the Space Wolf's Adeptus Astartes chapter. The two forces coming to blows over the fate of the humans who survived the first war for the planet Armageddon. It's not really the first war for Armageddon, but I'm not getting into the history of Armageddon. And eventually this escalated into full-blown conflict across numerous star systems, the period of becoming known as the Months of Shame. Seeking to end the war one way or another, Lord Inquisitor Kisnaros, who led the Audio Malleus forces, took his fleet to Fenris while the majority of the Space Wolves were still elsewhere, planning to either compromise or annihilate the home of the Space Marine chapter. However, while still negotiating, the Space Wolf fleet led by Logan Grimnar reappeared in the Fenris system, having sacrificed numerous rune priests in order to speed their journey through the warp. The wolves were able to catch their enemies by surprise. Still, the Inquisitorial fleet reacted quickly, beginning to bombard the fortress monastery of the Space Wolves, and defending themselves against the Space Marine fleet. Managing to bring down the Inquisitorial flagship's shields, Logan led a strike force via teleport onto the ship to slay Lord Inquisitor Kisnaros. Standing in his way were two Grey Knights. Their names, Hyperion and Malkadil. Attempting to respond to the threat, the Grey Knights opened fire with their Stormbolters, but the rapid-fire explosive rounds did nothing to slow Logan down, his Terminator plate deflecting the bolt shells so that the Chapter Master, who had exited the teleport mid-sprint, was haloed by a ring of micro-explosions. Tearing chunks of his ceramite armor away, yes, but slowing him not at all. Colliding with the Inquisitorial Space Marines, Logan lost a great deal of his momentum, but it didn't matter. The Terminator-clad wolf had bulk and power in excess of the two Grey Knights combined. Battering aside Malkadil's weapon, the Great Wolf hacked off one of the Grey Knight's recently installed augmetic legs, sending him toppling to the ground. Hyperion, of course, brought his staff around to assault the Great Wolf, but Logan used the toppling Malkadil to hide his follow-up attack, the side of his axe head smashing into Hyperion's helmeted temple. There is a saying that the blow unseen hurts the most, and it's fairly true. Even if you're unable to defend a strike, when you see it coming, your body kind of tenses, you can turn slightly, you can reduce the force and impact, and at least prepare. As this attack had come from outside Hyperion's field of view, it proved to be very effective, breaking part of his skull and sending the Grey Knight flying from the upper deck to the lower one. A 6-meter drop in half a ton of powered armor. Quite the fall even for a transhuman. With the other Space Marines out of the way, Logan quickly decapitated Inquisitor Kisnaros, before moving to finish off Malkadil. This, the recovering Hyperion could not allow. Surging up the stairs to the upper bridge once more, the Grey Knight opened fire with his remaining Stormbolter rounds, to which the Great Wolf turned his axe so the flat of the huge power weapon acted like a shield, the bolt rounds detonating harmlessly against the axe Morkai. Once Hyperion's weapon clicked empty, the Space Wolf Chapter Master brought his axe down again, taking an arm this time from Malkadil, who had rolled over in an effort to fire his own Stormbolter at Logan Grimnar. During this, Hyperion kept dashing towards the pair of Space Marines, psychically tossing aside an Inquisitor who had allied herself with the Space Wolves. But it wouldn't be enough, he was too far. This would be the end for the wounded Grey Knight. After the losses they had sustained on Armageddon, Malkadil was the lone other member of Hyperion's squad. Once that enormous axe fell again, Hyperion would be alone. And the Axe Morkai's arc had already begun. The Blade Breaker activated his back-mounted warp generator, dashing not across the deck, but through the madness of the warp, reappearing at point-blank range, staff meeting axe blade, the power fields from both weapons crackling against each other, psychic light pouring from the empowered Grey Knight's eyes. Hyperion had blocked the death blow, but now he was face to face with Logan Grimnar, their weapons locked up. The old wolf's Terminator enhanced strength quickly proving the greater. Hyperion's stave began to buckle as the young Grey Knight was forced back and back. However, Hyperion is known as the Blade Breaker for a reason. On the battlefields of Armageddon, he had already shattered the Black Blade of Angron, a far superior weapon to Logan's rune axe. Pouring psychic might into his staff, Hyperion began to win the contest. What's more, cracks began to run through the axe Morkai, the monstrous weapon falling apart as the Astartes shared brief words. Given a sudden telepathic warning from the prone Malkadil, Hyperion tried to disengage as another Space Wolf charged from behind, but Logan would not let him. Begging his brother to simply run, Malkadil summoned the last of his psychic might to hurl all three Space Marines from their feet with a burst of energy. Leaping up, Hyperion moved to re-engage, but before him was no longer two Space Wolves, but multiple squads moving to converge on the bridge. Fortunately, however, the Fortress Monastery of the Space Wolves had sustained near irreparable damage, and the future of the chapter had begun to be threatened by the orbital bombardment. This forced Bjorn the Fell-Handed, legendary dreadnought and only living-ish Space Wolf that could overrule Logan Grimnar, to teleport aboard Coral's Hope, and do just that, forcing the old wolf into a truce between the forces of the Inquisition and the Wolves of Fenris. Not wanting to die, and having countless ways beyond open warfare to avenge themselves on a Space Marine chapter, the remaining Inquisitors within the fleet were more than happy to deal. So Hyperion and Logan's duel was cut short. Though if that's not conclusive enough for you, Hyperion believes he would have lasted maybe another minute before Logan killed him. This has been Fightmaster. I am Precognition. Make sure to subscribe for more breakdowns of iconic 40k duels. The next one's gonna be Sevatar versus Sigismund.